Good evening, everybody. I trust you've had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I am sure it has been a happy one. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Hum the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So this is our last appearance for the foreseeable future. Anyway, hopefully we'll get back to ordinary ways, back to Satipanya inviting people to come. But until then, this I thought we'd end this particular series with the life of the Buddha, and really just to take an opportunity as a way of gratitude, of expressing gratitude, you might say. So we're at it's called the Noble Search, and the Buddha's at Anathapindika's Park again in Savatthi, that's up in the north, in the Kosala country. And he's been invited by Ananda to go and see the Brahmin Ramaka. So he goes there, and on that occasion, a number of bhikkhus were sitting together in the hermitage discussing the Dharma. The Blessed One stood outside the door waiting for their discussion to end. When he knew it was over, he coughed and knocked, and the bhikkhus opened the door for him. The Blessed One entered and sat down on the seat made ready and asked, what have you been talking about? Well, they basically said, we've been talking about you. Our discussion on the Dharma was interrupted by the Blessed One himself. The Blessed One arrived. So they were talking about the Dharma, about him as well. So the Buddha now gives his sort of life story, and he says, of course, there's an ignoble search and a noble search, one leading to Nibbana, one not leading to Nibbana. And he says there are people, a lot of people, who are subject to defilement, subject to aging, birth and death and all that, and seek what is subject to defilement. So in other words, this is always, remember, referring to an attachment and indulgence in the sensual life. And so he says, well, what may be said to be the subject of birth, of sickness, of death, of sorrow and defilement? So it's always a repetitious paragraph. Wife and children are subject to defilement. Men and women slaves, goats and sheep, fowls and pigs. Elephants, cattle, horses, mares, gold and silver are subject to defilement. Now remember, this defilement means the attachment. So we all know that phrase, money is the root of all evil, but of course it's the indulgence in money, the attachment to money, which is the root of all evil. And then he said to himself, someone himself subject to birth seeks the unborn supreme security of bondage. So the word for that was nibbana, which means to unshackle. And seeing this, he then begins to seek the undefiled supreme security. So now, So now he talks personally, before my enlightenment, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva. Now, bodhisattva is someone who determines to become a fully self-realized Buddha in the Theravada tradition. It was later expanded in the Mahayana tradition to mean anyone who was seeking liberation and who took the vow not to be fully liberated, of course, until everybody was. It's obviously going to take a very long time. And I always say, well, thank heavens the Buddha didn't take that vow. So myself, again, subject to sickness, aging, and death, supposing I myself sought this supreme relief from suffering. I seek the unaging, the unailing, deathless, sorrowless, the undefiled, supreme security. While still a black-haired young man, endowed with the blessings of youth, in the prime of life, though my mother and father wished otherwise and wept with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and went forth from home life into homelessness. And the first, what we'll do now is that he then tells us about this search for a teacher. But we can just say here, in this particular other discourse, there's a Brahmin, Janusoni, who comes up 3 or 4 times in the scriptures. And he says to the Buddha, remote jungle thicket resting places in the forest are hard to endure. Seclusion is hard to practice. It is hard to enjoy solitude. One would think the jungles must rob a bhikkhu or a meditator of his mind if he has no concentration. And the Buddha thought to himself, well, this is true. And upon reflection, he said, this is a defect of their unpurified bodily conduct, unpurified mental conduct, and unpurified verbal conduct. But he, on reflection, felt that he had already attained that sort of purity, at least at the level of control, so that he had overcome to a great extent all these hindrances of desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness, and agitation, uncertainty, doubting, not given to self-praise, subjecting, and so on and so forth. And so he takes to the meditation in these places. So we're talking about jungles here, we're talking about tigers and snakes and stuff like that. In Sri Lanka, there are a group of monks who are living in the jungle, like, you know, with tarantulas and snakes, no tigers, as far as I know. And they sleep in 3-sided kutis. So there's one side which is completely open to nature. A very famous group of monks up there. They're well known. So he says to himself, what if I were to dwell in such awe-inspiring places, horrifying abodes as orchard shrines, woodland shrines, and tree shrines? So this is where the devils were supposed to hang out. And while I dwelt there, a wild animal would come up to me, a peacock would knock a branch, a wind would rustle the leaves, and I thought, what now if this is the fear and dread coming? And so he says, what if I subdue the fear and dread while keeping the same posture as I am when it comes upon me? So here's the vipassana. When I walked, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither stood nor sat nor lay down till I had subdued that fear and dread. Subdued here means, of course, waiting for it to pass away. While I stood, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither walked nor sat nor lay down till I had subdued the fear and dread. While I sat, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither walked nor stood nor lay down till I had subdued the fear and dread. While I lay down, the fear and dread came upon me. I neither walked nor stood nor sat down till I had subdued the fear and dread. So here we have a clear indication that he also had his struggles. It wasn't all dead simple. So now coming back to the other discourse, we now see him going out to look for a teacher. And the first person he meets is Alara Kalama. And he quickly learnt the teaching from Alara Kalama, the actual understanding, the intellectual understanding. And then he would ask Alara Kalama, had he realized this for himself, and how far had his personal experience gone? And he declared it was the base of nothingness. Now, there are these absorption states that we've talked about, the jhanas, and there are 4 rupa jhanas and 4 arupa. Rupa means object. So using the breath remains your object that you'll develop these mental states on throughout those first 4. And those first 4 jhanas have particular qualities. So the first one has the quality of a physical joy. It's sort of a physical joy, you might say, with still some thought and some directed thought rather than anything else. But then when that goes, one is left with a mental joy, which is finer. And then one is left with, hold on, I've got confused. One is left with the physical joy, the thinking and all that disappears. And then as it becomes more refined, there is just a mental joy. And as that becomes more refined, there's just equanimity. But there's still an object that it's based upon. And when that completely disappears, you might say that the mind is in complete rest. And that's what we call the non-material jhana or absorptions. So there are 4 of those, and he got up to number 3. The first one is to feel the space within that mind, that sort of mind which has gone inactive, you might say. And then wherever you go in that space, there's always that knowing of it, there's the consciousness. And then as you wander around that space, you realize there's nothing there. So he got that far. And the Buddha entered and abide in this Dharma, realizing for myself with direct experience. Now, so much so that Alara Kalama actually says to him, so you know the Dharma that I know, and I know the Dharma that you know. As I am, so you are, and you are, as you are, so I am. Come, friend, let us lead this community together. So he was so good at it that he asked him to come and teach. However, on reflection, of course, when you come out of those particular states, you're back to being your ordinary horrible self, depressed, anxious, and so on and so forth. And therefore he realized that the Dharma does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nirvana, but only to this place, the appearance of nothingness. So he left, just like that. And then he went on and he heard about this other man called Udaka Ramaputta. And he invites him to come and join. And again, goes through the same process. Now, Udaka was the name of the person. Ramaputta means the son of Rama. So that could mean either his biological father or his spiritual father. Presumably it was his spiritual father. That's what I would presume. And he takes him as far as just the final one, which is neither perception nor non-perception. So that is, you're perceiving something, but there's nothing to be perceived. So these are sort of insights into that mental state. And so Rama says, so you are, as Rama is, so you are, as you are, so is Rama. Come, friend, now lead the community. So although Rama has told him about this state, there's a suggestion he didn't actually achieve it. It was his father. But again, the Buddha says, well, to himself, when he looks about it, when he comes off these states, he's back to being his ordinary depressed and anxious self. And he says it does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, or to enlightenment. And I left and went away. So now, 36. So now at this point, we don't quite know what came first, the mortifications and then this, or this and then the mortifications. But usually that's how it's put. He had enjoyed these jhana, these absorption states, found them wanting, and then went off to do some severe mortifications. Now, this was on the understanding that the root problem was the body. If you could somehow get rid of the body, you'd make it. But the first thing he practices is this meditation on the breath. And I'll just read one sentence, one paragraph. Now, supposing I practice further, the breathing, the breathless meditation. Supposing I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, nose, and ears. While I did so, there were violent pains in my head, just as a strong man were tightening a tough leather strap around my head as a headband. While I stopped the in-breath and out-breath through my mouth, and there were violent pains in my head. Well, you would expect something like that, I presume. But although tireless energy was aroused in me, mindfulness was established, my body was overwrought and uncalm because I was exhausted by the painful striving. But such painful feeling that arose in me did not invade my mind and remain. Okay, so even though he was practicing this, he had established that position of the observer, the feeler. And so he goes on, he said, it was like violent winds carved up my belly. And then he says, violent burning in my body. Oh, he really took it to the... And then finally, he decides he abandons that and he goes to cutting off food. Supposing I take very little food, a handful at a time, whether a bean soup or lentil soup or vetch soup or pea soup. And while I did this, my body reached a state of extreme emaciation. My limbs became like jointed segments of a vine stem or bamboo stem. My backside became like a camel's hoof. My spine stood forth like corded beads. My ribs jutted out as gaunt as crazy rafters on an old roofless barn. My eyes sank down in their sockets, looking like the gleam water that has sunk deep down into a deep well. My scalp shriveled and withered as a green bitter gourd shrivels and withers in the wind and sun. My belly skin adhered to my backbone. I touched my belly skin, I encountered my backbone. And if I touched my backbone, I encountered my belly skin. If I urinated or defecated, I fell over on my face right there. For heaven's sake, I wouldn't think there would be anything to defecate. I tried to ease my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands. The hair rotted at its roots, fell from my body as I rubbed. So there we have, that's pretty miserable. And he says to himself, whatever Brahmins and recluses have experienced painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion, this is the utmost. There's nothing beyond this. In other words, he doesn't see how anybody could have taken this mortification exercises any further than he has. But he reflects, even by the practice of these austerities, I've not attained any superhuman states, above human states. Any distinction in knowledge, vision worthy of the noble ones? Could there be another path to enlightenment? And here he remembers this childhood memory. It doesn't come out here, but there is another place where he's watching his father doing a ploughing ceremony, and he enters into these a similar sort of states of concentration. Here it's put as the jhana, but these really what we would call vipassana jhanas, because there is that quality of what is my father doing. And this gives him, another idea as to what to do. And seem to have lost the place of him seeking. It's a bit odd, just a minute, I've lost my place here somewhere. Oh yeah, we did that, the noble search, enlightenment. I have attained. That's odd. I've seem to have got myself in a confused place, subject to birth and bondage. Anyway, he makes his way. He finally decides to make his way to look for a place where he can meditate, and he ends up near modern-day Bodh Gaya, near a beautiful river, and he settles down to meditate there. And there he finds this nibbana. He's attained the undefiled supreme security. This Dharma I've attained is hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, unattainable by mere reason, subtle, to be experienced by the wise. But this generation delights in adhesion, and that's attachment, and delights and rejoices in attachment. So having experienced this wonderful awakening, and remember, there were three knowledges there. It's not written in this discourse. The knowledge that of his past births, where he saw how all his ethical decisions had caused him to be reborn and reborn. He saw other beings moving from one level of existence to another, driven by their ethical decisions. So what had been a personal law became a universal law for him. But the final third knowledge that he understood was that he had been completely cleared of his defilements. And so now, while he's sitting there, he's asking himself what to do with this knowledge. And he says that the people that he when he thinks about people, there's so much attachment there that he doesn't think they would be attracted. If I were to teach the Dharma, others would not understand me, and that would be wearying and troublesome for me. But then the Brahma Sahampati, whom we've heard a couple of times, reappears, and he says, the world will be lost, the world will perish, since the mind of the Tathaga, accomplished and fully enlightened, inclines to teaching the Dharma. And he says to the Blessed One, there are beings with eyes who are wasting through not hearing the Dharma. And this pleading by Brahma gets the Buddha to rethink his position. And he says, having decided to teach, he thinks about his former teachers, Alara Kalama. But then the deities tell him, and he comes to understand that Alara Kalama had died 7 days ago. And when he finds out about Udaka Ramaputta, he died that very day. So this, he says, is a great loss. If they had heard the Dharma, they would have understood it quickly. And then he remembers that group of 5 monks whom had been his companions until he left them. And so off he goes on his teaching trip. Now, there's a lovely bit here where on the way to Benares, modern-day Varanasi, on the banks of the Ganges, he meets an Ajivaka Upaka. So that's a recluse, somebody who's left the home, lives for the homeless life. And when he sees the Buddha, he says, your faculties are clear. The color of your skin is pure and bright. Under whom have you gone forth, friend? Who is your teacher? Whose Dharma do you profess? And the Buddha replies in verse here, one wonders, I am one who has transcended all, a knower of all, unsullied among all things, renouncing all, by craving ceasing, freed. Having known this all for myself, to whom shall I point as a teacher? I have no teacher, and one like me exists nowhere in the world with all its gods, because I have no person as my counterpart. I am the accomplished one in the world. I am the teacher supreme. I alone am fully enlightened, whose fires are quenched and extinguished. Now, when Upaka hears this, he says, by your claims, friend, you ought to be the universal victor. And the Buddha replies, the victors are those like me who have won the destruction of the taints. Remember the taints, the oozings. I have vanquished all evil states, therefore, Upaka, I am a victor. Now, the Ajivaka Upaka, when has said this, he said, maybe so, friend, shaking his head. He took a bypath and departed. So he wasn't particularly impressed by the Buddha's declaration of enlightenment. I think might have been a teaching point for the Buddha, really. Anyway, from then on, we've mentioned this before. He goes to see his 5 companions, and then spends the whole of his life, traversing the north part of India, teaching all the way from Delhi all the way across that northern part. His whole life is just devoted to that. So we can end our little passage here with this lovely setting for his departure, for his what's called parinibbana. So when a person achieves arahatship, when they still have this body, they still have this mind, which has traces of their old habits. But when they die, of course, all that's away. And therefore it's called parinibbana, their full, total nibbana. So the Buddha's been poisoned, not purposefully, by Channa, who has given him some, they think it's either truffles, what pigs eat, or some pork. Truffles, I think I've only had it once, and I can't say I took to them immediately, but they're supposed to be a very great delicacy. For those of you who haven't, it's slightly garlicky, deep, dusky aroma, earthy, pungent, that's what I remember, and funky, according to... they're a fungus, but they're not mushrooms, because they don't live over the ground. So so he could have been eating truffles. Frankly, I can't imagine it personally. It would be more pork, which goes off very quickly, as you know. So he's dying from this gastroenteritis, and he's an old man, he's 80, and he's lying there, and his life's ebbing away. And here he is, he's still teaching. Then the Lord addressed the monks, saying, it may be, monk, that some monks have doubts and uncertainty about the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, or about the path or the practice. Ask me now, monks, do not afterwards feel remorse, thinking the teacher was there before us and we failed to ask the Lord face to face. At these words, the monks were silent, and the Lord repeated his words a second and third time, and still the monks were silent. Then he said, perhaps you do not ask out of respect for the teacher. Then let one friend tell it to another. But still they were silent. Ananda said, oh, it's wonderful how there are no doubts and uncertainty. And the Buddha replies, indeed, I don't see anybody here who has less attained than a stream entrant, one who's got the first of the attainments. And then we have this lovely ending where the Buddha says to him, I declare all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive diligently for your liberation. And he passes away. And that was it. And those monks who had not yet overcome their passions wept and tore their hair, raising their arms, throwing themselves down and twisting and turning, crying, all too soon the Blessed One has passed away. All too soon the welfarer has passed away. All too soon the eye of the world has disappeared. I actually saw this also with an elderly monk who died. It was a beloved teacher in Sri Lanka, and the young monks couldn't stop themselves from crying. They had that relationship of son to father. And then, of course, there's always those who've gone beyond. And so the Venerable Anuruddha, whom we've met before, who was very good at explaining the Dharma, friends, Enough of your weeping and wailing. Has not the Lord already told you that all things that are pleasant and delightful are changeable, subject to separation and becoming other? So that put a damper on it, didn't it? So we have to leave it there. His remains are split into 8 parts for the different tribes or clans who wanted it. And today, of course, there's a great big stupa, very long, yes, great big stupa at Kusinagara, where he died. And so that brings us to the end of the Buddha's life. It's good to read about it. There are many biographies. Some of them follow the more imaginative story, and some are very basic. As you know, in parts of the scriptures, they say his father was like a king, and he had 3 gardens, one for the rainy season, the dry season, and the cold season. But basically, he was just an aristocrat, and his father was the head of a group, of a clan, who had to pay tribute to the local king, Pasenadi of Kosala. So reading the Buddha's story is an inspiration for us. We're only going through what he went through, a life of renunciation, and in the end, without any doubt, we will all be fully liberated, hopefully sooner rather than later. So we can do a bit of practice.